Welcome to Socialcast, your go-to place to learn about marketing, the latest social media news, and insights. Brought to you by Social Bakers.
Welcome to the next podcast episode from Social Bakers. Today we have Charles in the studio. Charles heads up our JAPAC team, and I think he knows the Asian market better really than anyone in our company. It's a really interesting conversation with a lot of insights, but bear in mind, we recorded this podcast before coronavirus really reached Europe, so it's not really a part of our conversation. We'll revisit that topic again in the future. But for now, without further ado, let's dive in. Hey Charles, so it's really good to have you here in person, visiting for our global sales kickoff, where we brought all the teams together at Social Bakers. Charles, you head up our JAPAC team, and it's a big team. And maybe can you tell us a bit more about our office there and your journey there, and before we dive into the topic and discuss the regional trends?
Yeah, hey, great. Thanks, Mantas. So I've lived in Asia Pacific over 20 years. I'm originally from the UK, you might be able to tell from my accent. But I left in the UK in 95, and I spent time in Australia, Hong Kong, and now been in Singapore over 20 years. So my responsibility is to head up Social Bakers across Asia Pacific. Mm-hmm. Asia Pacific is a pretty big market. You know, we've got everything from Australia and New Zealand all the way up to sort of Japan and Korea. That's almost pole to pole and spanning some pretty significant time differences east to west. And if you think about the population size, it's probably over half of the world's population, China, India, and plus everything else in between. So it's a pretty substantial region.
Yeah, and of course each market is slightly different, and I don't know how you do it.
Yeah, I don't know how we do it either, Mantas. It's a really good point. And you're right, the markets are so different in the languages that they speak, culturally, their uses of communication, their uses of technology, their uses of social media. So very, very disparate structure across not just social, but all the types of communication and the languages that they use.
Right. Well, so if we look at some of these different markets there compared to maybe part of Europe or even further west into the North America, how does it compare? What's really going on, and how are they different?
That's a really good question. And the first place I always like to start to answer that question is look at WeChat. WeChat, it's primarily known for its use in China, but it really dominates your everyday life if you're living in China. So you can pay, your dry cleaner, you go to the corner shop and pay, you can book holidays, you can book flights, you can buy cars. It's a communication channel. People in China for the last 3-4 years never, ever carry cash. Everything is done through WeChat and a QR code. And I'm going to go to the polar extreme right now. Even beggars walk around with cardboard cutouts with a QR code for you to then zap. So they don't even want cash either. Everything is really driven by WeChat. So that's the polar, right? And they are far, far ahead of anything we've seen anywhere else in the world. The US is nowhere near in Europe or anything like that. So I think that's an amazing case study of how social and mobile and apps can really be used to create this sort of Uber app, or this app that really is at every single touch point in your daily lives.
Right. Well, that's for China, of course. Is there any differences if we look at other markets there?
There's a lot, right? We're talking 13, 14 different types of markets and how they use social. So I'm based in Singapore, where I've been for 21 years. And really, we're pretty much using social as it is in the West. Nothing really special about, we use a lot of WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and everything like that. Go a little bit further north into markets like Cambodia and Myanmar. And this is what's interesting as well, is that they don't use Google for search.
They have some local engine. No?
They use Facebook.
Interesting.
How interesting is that? And to be honest, look, Facebook search isn't the best search solution, right? We know that. But they will Facebook something rather than Google something. When we see markets such as Philippines, they're very, very heavily using applications like Viber. You go into Thailand, somewhat Indonesia, and into Japan, and they're using a lot of Line, Korea, Kakao Talk. So there's a lot of these independent applications that have really found their own footprint in their local markets, and sometimes they've had luck in expanding overseas, and sometimes they've just been really, really contained.
Yeah. How does that change in terms of, well, maybe back to the WeChat case, how does it change in terms of entering the market? And I imagine if you're coming from the West with maybe the knowledge of how to do marketing here, does it help you out in that sector?
Yeah, that's a big question, right? I don't think so. How we market in the countries within Asia Pacific, it's very, very different in terms of the language, the cultural sensitivities, even whether they get certain jokes or you can be a little bit sarcastic in some of your communication. It might work in one market, but it doesn't certainly work in another market. Even how we communicate. So I'm in a sales role. If I'm selling into Indonesia or Singapore or some of the other markets in Southeast Asia, we can go very heavily onto WeChat. Some deals are done on WeChat and WhatsApp, right? Whereas if I'm selling into Australia, they still prefer email as the primary communication. In China, everything is just done through mobile and a mobile phone, the same with Southeast Asia. So I think the adoption of the technology is very varied across the different markets. And just the speed in which they expect responses then also changes. So when you send a WhatsApp message, you're immediately waiting for the 2 blue ticks. Yeah. So they got the 2 blue ticks, they've got it. Why haven't they responded? You're waiting there to the point where it gets frustrating if you're waiting a few minutes. So the Asian markets are very, very fast in how they expect their responses. And you don't see that in some of the Western markets. They don't expect that real-time feedback and that real-time communication. And then that carries across very nicely onto brands, onto social media. If I'm a consumer and I want something and I'm doing it via Twitter or I'm doing it via Facebook, I expect an immediate response. I don't have to expect to wait 2 or 3 minutes. I want it now. A great example is some of the telcos in Indonesia. Their average response time is 2 minutes. That's incredible. It's incredible. And I think something like the top 5 or 8 brands, they're all within 5 minutes in Indonesia. Their average response time.
Yeah, so there's definitely something for us to learn here. And I wonder what's really maybe slowing us down. Is it regulation compared to the region? Is it, when you look at Europe, there's really quite a bit of regulation and the market just moves slower.
That's a good point. I also think the cost of labor is an important point. We see the cost of labor in a lot of Asian markets not as expensive as you get in some of the European and the American markets. So they can actually physically throw people to respond and to engage. They can throw literally hundreds and hundreds of people at a problem rather than that a limitation would apply in some European markets.
What about businesses that try to enter one of these markets that you've been speaking about? What should they watch out for? What are maybe some of the mistakes that marketers make?
I think some of the mistakes that marketers make aren't that different than you would see maybe in Europe, where you try and fit one message into multiple different countries or a single message into multiple different platforms. And we know that just doesn't work. You have to customize your message by the platform. You have to customize your message by the market as well. And I'm not just talking about language. I'm talking about, again, some of the cultural sensitivities, some of how certain words are used and how things are phrased. It's not a matter of just going into Google Translate and expecting a direct translation. It doesn't quite work like that. So I think brands have to invest a lot of time into the individual markets in which they're focusing to really understand and do A/B testing, multivariate testing, to really understand what is working and what isn't working in that market. And I don't think there is a playbook that's going to give you the answers. I don't think there's a cookie cutter approach. It really depends on the product that you're selling or the product that you're marketing. And then it's just going through a series of experimentation. The cost of media also varies significantly across Asia Pacific. If you look at Facebook, average cost per click in Australia is significantly higher, some of the highest in the world, compared to Indonesia, which is some of the lowest in the world. So then you just have to be very, very experimental with how you manage your budgets.
Not sure how to digitally transform your business from A to Z? Yeah, it's really not that easy. But if you follow a clear step process, you can actually do it. We've put together a guide that tells you everything you need to know about transforming the marketing part of your business. Download it now. The link is in the description. So you said you came from the UK. How steep was the learning curve for you personally? Is there something that you kind of learned along the way that was a bit shocking for you?
The funny thing is, I think now when I come back to Europe, I feel more of a tourist than when I do, because I've lived in Asia 26 years, and I also spent a year and a half in Seoul. So I get frustrated by the speed, or the lack of the speed here, that things don't quite move quick enough. I'd like to see things move a lot quicker, and I'm one of those guys that's waiting for the 2 blue ticks and then counting, down from 30 seconds to get my response, but it doesn't always open like that. Again, I feel that Asia, it's always been a little bit on the back foot, and they've worked incredibly hard now to be leading or have some global economies within the top 5, within the top 10. I think China's number 2 in the world now. So they just work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to overachieve. And that's what I love about the Asia Pacific region, how hard they work and their desire to be number 1 and just put all their passion and all their energy into it. And so with that, they're constantly being innovative. They don't necessarily have these fixed playbooks as some European or American companies do. They're willing to be creative. That doesn't mean they're taking shortcuts. It just means they're trying different approaches to get the same response in a quicker way. And that's what I really love, that degree of creativity. And also you see in India and China some amazing technical resources. Some of the best technical resources are coming out of those markets right now. And so some of the innovation, like WeChat, coming back to that, how far ahead it is of any Western competitor. There's nothing else like it in the world. Although, they've tried with Messenger. Facebook have been talking about Libra and their cryptocurrency, and that's not really off to a good start. Markets like China, it's also controlled by the government, that if you get the green flag from the government, or the green light rather, you go ahead. And as long as you follow their guidelines, you're free to do what you want. And I think that, to me, is what's most impressive. The use of fintech as well is very, very strong in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, that's a whole other podcast discussion, is the fintech industry. But maybe if we talk marketing, our audience probably would be curious to hear some of the success examples that they could just look up and see what those brands are doing there.
Wow, success examples in Asia Pacific. I think I've got to think about some of our clients and what our clients are doing. We work with a lot of the handset manufacturers. I believe what they're doing is very, very strong, and how they're leveraging the platforms to export their products overseas, and how they're understanding their audiences by using solutions like Social Bakers to be able to identify the anomalies across all the different markets. So in terms of the customization. If you're then talking about marketing into Asia Pacific and the customization, a lot then just really depends on multivariate testing and different types of testing, and being willing to get things wrong a lot before you even start to get them right. I really like some of the activities banks in Australia are doing, again, more customization with the content. And some of the challenger brands we work with are doing a really good job at not just looking at social, but taking understanding from social and then applying that to broader digital strategies, such as the website. So what they're communicating on social, understanding those audiences and the personas of those audiences, and then not just making those modifications on the social channels, but making those modifications on the web channels. And I really like that linkage from social to web. E-commerce is very strong. We work a lot with a lot of e-commerce brands, and they're also very innovative and very creative in the types of content that they're broadcasting on social. So constantly trying different different sort of content types and different types of videos for different types of content and different types of promotions, I think is very strong.
Yeah, I think we'll try to include some of these examples maybe in the description for the podcast, so that the audience can go and visit some of these brands. But looking into the future, so if you had to predict what's going to happen for the marketers in the region, let's say in the 5 years and maybe in the short term, like what's the 2020 going to look like? What are we focusing on?
2020's already got off to an interesting start, don't you think? Especially with the coronavirus and how that started in China and how rapidly information spread around the world on the number of cases, and but it also led to a lot of false information. So I really hope in 2020 what's going to happen, well, social is just going to become more and more important, but you could have said that in 2014, 15, 16, all the way through to now. You can probably say it until 2022, 2023. I hope marketers stop using social just as a broadcast channel. I hope they start to customize content. I hope they don't just look at it as, or they look at it beyond a paid channel, and they start to develop a lot of organic content and be more creative in the type of content that they're using to engage with their audiences. I also really hope we can start to use it for social good. And I think that's a big thing that's really lacking. We've seen a few brands sort of jump onto the bandwagon, plastic, removing plastic bags and straws made out of paper rather than plastic, and more environmentally friendly messages. I hope that brands start to leverage social to communicate the benefit that they're doing it for the environment, and not just trying to jump on a hype or a buzz and something like that. So I hope there's going to be a lot more social brands are going to use social for much better social responsibility and communicating a bigger message, not just about themselves, but about the environment.
Yeah, that's. It looks like this is sort of an emerging, almost a global trend to in some way, and it's as if brands have now a second chance to really take the CRO seriously and really do something meaningful about it.
And the other thing I think is around community, not necessarily customer care, but looking at the community. Everyone's driving content to the social or to the websites, and to have some sort of conversation with people. Don't just, as customers, we like to comment. Sometimes comments are positive, sometimes they're negative. But for brands to start to engage with those comments a little bit more and invest time in really understanding what their audience want and what they desire. And social is the perfect mechanism for that. It's a two-way platform, probably one of the best two-way platforms. So I hope brands start to invest significantly more into that process than they are today.
Well, it does sound positive, so I assume you're not escaping the region anytime soon.
I'm not escaping the region anytime soon, and my wife is often saying, hey, should we move outside of Europe? But then we haven't got that far, so I think we're staying in Asia for some time soon. It's a great place to live. I love the dynamics. I love the diversity. I love the people. I love the culture. Most importantly, I love the food.
Yes, the food. Well, I think we should perhaps dive into some of these markets in more detail in other podcast episodes with you. Perhaps we'll connect in a couple of weeks, but it was really good to get the scoop from you and in such detail. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mantas. Appreciate it.
Thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you.